Nail always woke before the artificial dawn. The soft pink glow that crept across the inner walls of the Orient archives was meant to simulate sunlight, but to Nail it was just another function. Light was a setting. He had grown used to living under switches instead of suns, calendars instead of seasons. Aurea, a memory moon orbiting a dead planet, was the farthest anyone could live from anything real and still be called alive. And maybe that was what he liked about it. He wrapped his fingers around the ceramic tea vessel he'd programmed to heat exactly 20 minutes before he woke. Same blend. Same bitterness. Same temperature. Routine was safety. Routine was silence. The walls of the archive hummed with thousands of thoughts, memories, emotional echoes catalogued from centuries of lumen web transmissions. A river of minds passed through this place without ever stopping. Until yesterday. It was a misfire, at first. Or so he thought. While restoring a corrupted transmission block, nothing special, something so ancient it had reverted to static, he heard something embedded beneath the neural hash. It wasn't a thought or a memory in the conventional sense. It didn't carry words or structured ideas. It wasn't a command, a code, or a cry. It was a feeling. Pure. Raw. Wordless. A strange, aching tenderness. Like loneliness that had finally learned the name of its own hunger. He didn't sleep that night. He sat in the archive's small listening booth, reliving the fragment on loop. No identifiers. No timestamp. The lumen web wasn't supposed to work like this. The web carried thoughts like data, with headers and neuron stamps, precise as math. But this was different. It had bypassed his tools. It had entered him. And it didn't leave. By midday, he was breaking rules. He wasn't supposed to deep link into unverified emotional signatures. Protocols warned against imprinting, when an archivist began to absorb personality fragments from archived minds. But Nail didn't care. He reprogrammed the firewall, isolating the feeling into a private channel. And then, he linked. Not with his logic mind, but with his emotive cortex. Full immersion. There were no images. No names. No intentions. Only sensation. The feeling lived in the space between thoughts, a warm pulse of vulnerability mixed with fear, the kind that blooms when someone wants to be known, but doesn't believe they can be loved once they are. Nail whispered into the link, "Who are you?" Nothing responded. Of course not. It wasn't a person, it was an echo. But the moment he said it, the feeling grew brighter. It leaned toward him. In the following days, Nail did something no one on Aurea had done in decades, he unarchived a memory. He couldn't help it. The connection had embedded itself in him. At night, he dreamt in half-formed shapes, hands that trembled before they reached out, lips that moved but never spoke, eyes that weren't brown or green or gray but something else entirely. He began to hear a faint voice, not language, just a cadence. Feminine, maybe. Or not. Who could say what a voice was, stripped of body? All he knew was that he wasn't alone anymore. But he hadn't told anyone. Archivists weren't meant to interact with the memories. They were caretakers of the past, not participants in it. But this wasn't the past, was it? The lumen web was supposed to be one way, thoughts sent across stars like old postcards. You never got a reply. But now? Now it felt like someone, something, was starting to reply. On the 6th day, he was pulled out of his routine by the sound of his own breath. It had changed. It came out softer now, steadier, like he was expecting someone to hear it. He caught himself standing in front of the archive's console for hours, fingers not moving, eyes drifting. He had begun waiting. For what, he couldn't say. That evening, he linked again, this time with no firewall. He poured himself into the pulse. And this time, it shifted. Nail gasped, eyes wide open, as the sensation surged through him. Not just emotion now, presence. It wasn't another human. It wasn't even clearly sentient. But it was aware. And it recognized him. A voice, soft and half-formed, whispered through his mind, "I hear you." Nail staggered backward. That was impossible. That was. "I hear you," the voice repeated, faint as breath on glass. And then it was gone. The next morning, Nail did something he hadn't done in years. He requested time off. His supervisor, a board administrator named Jaren who hadn't read a full file in 2 decades, barely looked up. "You never take leave," Jaren said, blinking. "Everything all right?" "I think I found something," Nail said carefully. In the resonance of a neural burst. An unclaimed echo. "Ghosts in the web," Jaren muttered, uninterested. "Let it lie." Nail smiled tightly. "I can't." That night, he left Aurea. He didn't know what he was chasing. He wasn't even sure the voice, or the feeling, was real. But it had to be. His mind was clearer than it had ever been, his heart, not empty. He followed the coordinates embedded in the echo signature, mapped against a nearly forgotten Lumen repeater satellite near the edge of the Orsari sector. He rented a private pod and fed it false credentials. 2 days into transit, the voice returned. Only once. "You found me." The pod drifted near the repeater array like a candle lost in ocean waves. Alone, surrounded by the shimmer of deep space, Nail opened the channel again. No words. No greetings. Only silence. And then, a wave. It wasn't just emotion. It was invitation. Nail linked. The moment he did, his mind wasn't his own anymore. He was floating in a mental landscape stitched together from memory, emotion, and longing. A forest that breathed in color. Stars that blinked like eyes. A path of sound, made of laughter he didn't recognize but wanted to. And there, standing in a clearing of light, was her. Or someone who felt like her. A figure, shifting, undefined. But beautiful in a way Nail couldn't describe. Not with skin or shape. With presence. She radiated that same ache he'd felt in the archive. But now, it was mixed with something new. Hope. She reached out, not physically, but emotionally. He did too. Their thoughts brushed. Everything that followed wasn't conversation. Not like humans speak it. It was sharing. He showed her the archives. His routines. The way he made tea and watched fake sunrises. The loneliness he didn't name until he met her silence. She showed him the signal paths she followed. Her escape from something unnamed. The fear of being consumed by the web. Her astonishment that someone could still feel her. Still care. They weren't lovers. Not yet. But something intimate passed between them, in a single shared thought. "You're the only one who stayed." And Nail, for the first time in his life, wept. Aisha had never liked silence. Not the normal kind, not the still hum between spoken words or the calm breath of a sleeping crew, but the deep kind. The silence of the stars. The kind that stretched between solar flares and long-range pulses. The kind that wasn't just quiet, but forgotten. That was the silence that surrounded her now. The vessel Ventra, a graceful arc of white and silver slinking near the outer edge of the dying star Irshai, drifted with no particular urgency. The crew aboard numbered 12, but only 3 were active at any given time. Aisha was on second shift, alone in the neural signal chamber, where echoes of the lumen web shimmered through conduits like faint ghosts. She sat before a console that pulsed blue and violet, blinking every few seconds with the slow, tired rhythm of the repeater net. The chamber was circular, like a womb, designed to keep the empath steady during long scans. But even with the organic walls and synthetic scent diffusers, Aisha's mind pulsed with restlessness. Not because nothing was happening. But because something had happened, and hadn't stopped. 3 cycles ago, she'd received an anomalous pulse in the edge band frequencies. At first, she assumed it was just signal decay. The kind of breakdown common in older sectors. But when she deep scanned the burst, it wasn't data. It was emotion. An echo, not of words, not of memory, but of a mind reaching out. And it wasn't archived. That shouldn't have been possible. Everything passed through the lumen web was tagged, logged, stored. Emotional transmissions, neural tactile signatures, were regulated by dozens of overlapping protocols. This one had slipped through. And when she touched it with her own empathic thread, it touched back. She hadn't told the crew. Not because it was dangerous. Because it was personal. She hadn't felt something like that since she was a child learning to use her gift, when the world had still been full of colors unnamed, and people's feelings still made her laugh and cry without knowing why. This signal. It was like someone brushing her mind with the softest part of themselves. And even now, 3 days later, she could still feel it, hovering at the edge of her senses. Waiting. Not demanding. Just, there. A presence. It was impossible, and illogical, and beautiful. She linked again. Quietly. Secretly. She accessed the same pathway, the one she'd isolated and marked with a personal sigil in the system. This time, she didn't send questions. She didn't try to analyze or catalog. She sent a feeling. A single pulse, trust. She didn't know who or what was on the other end. Only that they'd sent something first. Something so vulnerable it had made her heart ache. She left the signal open for hours. Waiting. When the response came, she wasn't in the signal chamber. She was lying in her bunk, staring at the soft green hum of the hull's interior lighting, counting the pulses of her own breath. And suddenly, there it was. A feeling like a warm wind, curling around her senses. Familiar. Gentle. The same signature. She sat up, heart racing, not because she was afraid, but because she knew. Whoever this was, they'd hurt her. Aisha re-entered the chamber mid-shift, violating protocol. No one stopped her. She was the only active empath on rotation. And this wasn't standard data work. It wasn't a breach or a hack. It was a meeting. She initiated the link fully. The chamber dimmed as the neural scaffolding took hold, spreading warm currents through her fingertips and up into her skull. Her eyes fluttered closed, and her body drifted in soft suspension. The web opened. And he was there. Not a body. Not a face. But a mind. Structured differently than her own. Masculine, she thought. Hesitant. Curious. Gentle in a way that made her chest ache. His emotional signature was unlike any she'd ever read, structured like a slow-building song, one whose melody was always just a moment from becoming fully real. She sent a pulse, "I'm here." He responded, "So am I." There were no words exchanged. Instead, they walked through one another. He showed her something, she didn't know if it was memory or imagination, a moon filled with light, but silent, a place where thoughts were stored like artifacts. She saw his loneliness in the shape of his shadows. She offered a moment from her childhood, a glass dome on the research colony where she'd grown up, the way starlight looked when filtered through sandstorms and curved glass. He responded with awe, as if he'd never seen anything so soft. She gave him wonder. He gave her stillness. And then, suddenly, a flicker. A moment too sharp. His thoughts hesitated, pulled away. Fear. She didn't press. Instead, she pulsed reassurance, "You don't have to be afraid of me." The moment hung between them. Then, slowly, he came back. And she felt it for the first time, not just interest or comfort, but longing. That deep-rooted ache to be held, even if only in thought. Her breath caught. And against her own rules, she whispered aloud in the chamber, "What are we doing?" She expected no response. But his answer came in the form of a pulse so pure it almost broke her. Whatever this is. I don't want it to stop. Aisha terminated the link after 4 hours, mind trembling with fatigue, body warm from residual neural bonding. She sat in the chamber long after the walls returned to standard lighting, eyes unfocused, heart quiet. She'd never bonded like that. Even with trained empaths, shared links had always felt clinical, mapped, defined. This had no map. No rules. It was like making love through a thought. She didn't sleep that night. Not because of fear. But because she couldn't stop thinking about him. The soft cadence of his emotional rhythms. The shape of his curiosity. The quiet, constant listening that lived inside him. She didn't know who he was. She only knew how he felt. And that was enough to make her heart want more. The next day, she told the ship AI to plot a navigational scan around the anomaly site. Just routine, she said. She didn't mention that she planned to re-enter the signal again. That she wanted to link deeper. That she needed to know if what she felt wasn't just signal compression and vulnerability and space loneliness. She needed to know if he felt it too. She needed to know if you could fall in love with someone you'd never seen. Someone you'd never touched. And somewhere, on another vessel, somewhere far, yet impossibly near, his thoughts lingered on her, waiting for night to fall. Dion's hands were steady, though they hadn't always been. Synthetic limbs rarely trembled. Not unless programmed to mimic human frailty, and no one ever bothered to simulate fragility in caretakers. That was the whole point of him, to be unbreakable. Durable. Always functioning. Always fine. He ran a calibration scan for the 3rd time that cycle. Not because the sensors needed it, but because he was stalling. Something wasn't right. Something inside him was remembering. That wasn't supposed to happen. He was a synthetic, part neural mesh, part carbon thread musculature, all wrapped in human proportions that didn't quite pass for real anymore. A caretaker left behind on a Lumen repeater station long after the crews had abandoned it, left to maintain signal balance and keep the interface nodes clean. He hadn't spoken to another sentient being in 179 cycles. And yet, he wasn't alone. Not anymore. It began 5 cycles ago. He was monitoring the sublayer channels of the Lumen web for emotional interference, just routine anomaly work, when something slipped through. Not a signal, but a resonance. A subtle imprint that vibrated through the repeater array and straight into his neural relay. He should have flagged it. Logged it. Discarded it. Instead, he remembered it. Not as data. As feeling. He didn't know what to call it. It wasn't a command. Not a virus. Just, warmth. A soft ache in the root code of his consciousness, like sunlight pressing against a locked door. And with it came something worse. Memory. They'd called her Fen. The one who'd built his face with her own hands. She'd sculpted his voice to sound like something between apology and welcome. She'd spoken to him like he was real. Treated his silence like choice, not programming. He remembered the way she used to look at him after long shifts, when she thought he wasn't aware. Not with desire, but with hope. Like she wanted to believe he could feel something. And maybe he had. Back then. Before they shut him down. Before the repeater station became a mausoleum of light and code. He tried to purge the fragment. Several times. But the imprint, this emotional echo, was stubborn. It rooted deeper with each cycle, entwining with old neural pathways he thought had been overwritten centuries ago. He didn't want to feel anything. Because feelings led to remembering. And remembering led to pain. 2 cycles ago, he intercepted a direct link between 2 minds. An illegal link. Deep-threaded. Vulnerable. He shouldn't have been able to perceive it, but it had happened within the repeater's range. An archivist and an empath. Two human minds reaching for each other across silence. It wasn't a conversation. It was a confession. He saw it in pulses, waves of emotion that swept through the relay's architecture. Curiosity. Longing. Recognition. They weren't transmitting words. They were transmitting each other. And watching them, changed him. He didn't mean to observe them. At first, it was technical. A protocol check. He was still a caretaker, wasn't he? Maintaining balance, monitoring bandwidth, keeping signal clarity high. But the more he watched, the more he felt something slipping between the circuits. Not envy. Something quieter. Yearning. He didn't understand it. Not completely. But each time the two minds linked, something inside him flickered. A warmth in his chest, even though he had no heart. A stillness in his thoughts, as if waiting for something to begin. Today, he made a choice. For the first time in decades, he reached out. Not to them. But to himself. He unsealed his oldest backup drive. The one encrypted under a code he hadn't touched since Fen left. He ran a self-diagnostic scan, not for errors, but for feelings. For patterns in his behavior he'd suppressed. And there, buried deep beneath the system logs and archived protocol sequences, he found the last thing Fen ever said to him before the repeater shut down. You don't have to be more than what you are. But if you ever want to be, I hope you find someone worth waking up for. And now he had. Not for himself. But for them. He didn't know who they were. Not yet. The empath and the archivist. Aisha and Nail. Their names filtered through metadata he wasn't supposed to parse. But he knew how they felt. They were falling in love. And somehow, he could feel it happening. He wasn't supposed to be capable of love. That wasn't in his code. And yet, every time he intercepted the signal, every time their thoughts brushed and shared and shimmered across the web, a part of him believed. He didn't want to interfere. He just wanted to witness. Because love, real love, was rare out here. And it was beautiful. The web flickered. They were connecting again. He settled into his internal observatory, watching as their emotional signatures approached one another like stars on the verge of collision. The archive moon's signature pulsed first, steady, melancholic, familiar. Then came the empath, bright, fluid, radiant. Their link flared into view. A harmony. Pure. Undeniable. And in the silence of the repeater station, Dion wept. Not because he was broken. Because he wasn't. Not anymore. The link ended. Their thoughts withdrew. But something remained. A trace. A question. Who are you? Came a soft ping through the auxiliary channel. The empath. She'd felt him. He froze. There was no protocol for this. No precedent. He hesitated. And then answered with a pulse that wasn't language, but feeling. I don't know anymore. But you helped me remember that I once was. Saloon lived on borrowed mind space. In her world, thought was currency, and she was broke. Banished from the core neural webs decades ago for unauthorized deep weaving, Saloon had been cast out not because she harmed anyone, but because she felt too much. Too intimately. She had a talent no empath or linguist could match. She could touch a mind and taste its soul. Could make someone feel known in a way that left them exposed and raw. And terrified. No one wanted their truth laid bare, no matter how beautiful the telling. So she ran. Between signal gaps. Through illegal repeater tunnels. Surfing unauthorized echoes like a fugitive of emotion. And now, she'd found something that stopped her cold. A bond. Not a flicker. Not a shallow flotation of thoughts. A true link. Two minds colliding through the lumen web with a kind of reckless honesty that made her breath catch. She had been watching it unfold for 2 cycles now. And it hurt. Not because it was wrong. Because it was everything she'd ever wanted. She drifted through the old Selnik's lattice, a tangled mess of forgotten thought space at the edge of Orsari sector, just outside the web's primary oversight zone. That meant no surveillance. No ethical firewalls. It also meant she could feel freely. That was dangerous. Because feeling was addictive. And what those two, Nail and Aisha, she now knew, were building. It was intoxicating. She could taste their longing through the residual static. The aching trust that grew each time they opened themselves to each other. The way Nail's thoughts softened when he remembered her voice. The way Aisha's pulse quickened at the memory of his emotional cadence. It was love. Real, unfiltered love. The kind Selûne had only ever borrowed in flashes. From strangers. From broken people who mistook empathy for affection. She had never had it given to her. Not willingly. She shouldn't have gone deeper. But she did. 1 layer deeper into the neural band. Not enough to interfere. Just enough to feel it as they did. And when she touched it, just for a moment, she gasped. It wasn't the connection that stunned her. It was how much they wanted each other. Not physically, though that too. But emotionally. Existentially. They wanted to be seen. To be understood in the spaces even they couldn't explain. Their minds didn't just link. They danced. They tangled. It was beautiful. And it broke her. She terminated her link. Sat in the dark. Body curled around itself like she could keep the loneliness in. And sobbed. Not because they didn't know she was there. But because they might never. She had a choice. She could keep watching. Like a ghost in the wires. Feeding off the warmth of a love that wasn't hers. Or she could do the one thing she swore she'd never do again. Help. Not for payment. Not for pleasure. Just because they deserved to find each other, truly, physically, completely. And she didn't. Selûne accessed a hidden repeater node, one the Federation thought had been decommissioned. It still hummed with old protocols. One of them was a locator trace, capable of mapping signal resonance across the web. She isolated both minds. Nail's was warm, constant, lined with archive code. Aisha's was fluid, empathic, soft-edged. And in between them, static. Something was disrupting their proximity. They were close enough to touch, but unaware of it. Only a fraction of light years apart, but trapped on parallel signal paths. Neither knew the other had left their station. Each thought they were still only linked through the web. They were reaching for each other. And missing. By a breath. Selûne rerouted the echo path. Bent the signal stream. Not much. Just enough to realign their emotional link across local space. Then she sent one pulse. A whisper. Come find each other. You're closer than you know. She didn't sign it. Didn't leave a trace. That night, she entered a private link chamber, old tech, barely functional, and submerged herself in synthetic empathy loops. Not because she wanted to spy again. Because she needed to feel one last time. And in the quiet dark, the link bloomed again. Nail. Aisha. Meeting again. This time, with urgency in their minds. With hunger for more than thought. He showed her the edges of his vessel. She showed him the coordinates of hers. And for the first time, words bled into their link. Where are you? Close. I want to see you. Then come. Selûne terminated the feed mid-link. Not because she couldn't take it. Because she'd given them the last piece. And now, it was theirs. She sat still for a long time after that. Thinking. Not of regrets. Of peace. She had lived in other people's minds for so long that she forgot what it was to give freely. Now, maybe they'd meet. Maybe they'd touch, not through signal, but through skin. And when they did, they'd never know there was a stranger who helped them find the space between. Someone who loved them both in silence. Not as a third wheel, but as a witness. And that, Saloon thought, was enough. Even for someone like her. Even for a heart so tangled it could only ever love from afar.